most retellings of Greek myths, apart from the Iliad and the Odyssey, will have probably have been based on the Metamorphoses, because what Ovid does is go from the creation of the world to his own day. He tells stories. And the thing that links every single story is that in every story, sometimes the main point of the story, sometimes very much oh, by the way, at the end, is this idea of change. Somebody or something changes into something else.
Hello. Ovid was a Roman poet, much of whose life coincided with the reign of Augustus. He was the most famous writer during his time, a genuine superstar, and his works dealing with sex, violence, and mythology have meant he continues to attract study, translations, and books today. Joining me is Fiona Forsyth, author of Poetic Justice, who discusses the poet's life, his work, and his legacy, as well as a recommended translation. Coming up, I have the SAS in Italy, Churchill's German, the Royal Navy, Richard II and Henry IV, and much, much more. So please do subscribe or follow, and thank you to those who've left a kind review. It's very touching. If you want to get in touch, there's an email address in the show notes, history@aspectsofhistory.com. But in the meantime, it's Ovid with Fiona Forsyth. Fiona Forsyth, welcome to the podcast. Great pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thank you, Ollie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, listeners, Fiona's on to talk today about, well, Ovid primarily, but we'll do a little bit of Roman history because this is all in the context of Fiona's novel, Poetic Justice, which is actually a very good title. Did you come up with that yourself?
No, Richard did.
Oh, right. It's very good because it really does sum up precisely what the novel is. So, okay, we're talking about Ovid, the poet, Roman poet, for listeners who are completely clueless. There are very few of those. Very highly educated listenership, Fiona, you'll be pleased to hear. But in this, basically, Ovid's a detective.
A kind of accidental detective, yes.
Yes.
It's more he finds a friend and he clings on to him, and that involves sort of helping him out with the investigation. I think what Ovid doesn't realise for an awful lot of the book, because he's incredibly I have made him a very self-centered person. He doesn't realise that everything that's going on is genuinely, for once, about him. And that's the surprise towards the end for him. Nobody else is surprised. Everyone else has figured out what's going on.
Well, he's an artist, and so,
Oh,
inevitable, I suppose.
Yes, I think he is back of the hand glued to the forehead. I am an artist.
Wonderful. Well, because it is interesting. So Ovid is a fascinating figure, really. We don't actually know that much about him, do we, Fiona?
We know more about him than nearly any other Roman poet, as long as you believe what he tells us. And one of Ovid's great strengths is his duplicity and his ability to kind of put layer upon layer until you wonder what the truth is. But there is a poem that he wrote in which he gave his biography. So we know, for example, as long as we can trust him, we know that he was born on I think it's the third day of the festival of Athena in March, which, works out at the 21st of March, I think. And we know he had an older brother who was born exactly a year before him, which is quite something. And so things like that. But as I say, there is always a caveat with the real Ovid because he's so good at disguising himself in his poetry.
Oh, well, okay. So I suppose I had said that we don't know much about him. I guess the reason why I say that is because we don't really know why he fell out with Augustus. But so we should park that for a moment because we'll get to that. It's very exciting. But he is born, so it's 43 BC, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that is like he's born right at the time of a very tumultuous time in Roman history, isn't he? A year later, Julius Caesar is
What, year before?
Of course, a
Oh, I'm
year
so glad you
before.
did that.
Normally, I'm quite good at that, but I've messed that one up. Okay, so yes, 44 BC is when Julius Caesar is murdered.
And then if you think about it, the Battle of Philippi, which ushers in a horrendous time of civil war, is the year after. So Ovid is born at the end of the Roman Republic. He will not have known a functioning Roman Republic as he grew up, but he will. If you take Augustus's word for it, that civil wars kind of stop when he defeats Antony, 31, at the Battle of Actium. Ovid will therefore have spent his childhood probably very aware of all the fighting and arguments going on. There's no way that a clever and inquisitive 10-year-old would not have been aware of it. But then when he's 12, behold, Augustus, Prince of Peace sort of thing comes along. And I feel, therefore, that Ovid probably had one of the fullest exposures to Augustus's propaganda, presentation of himself.
I suppose he'd be very much a beneficiary because
Yes.
it's a nice stable period for him within which to grow up and then to begin
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah. And he came from exactly the sort of family that Augustus loved to support and promote. If Ovid had chosen to go into politics, I've no doubt he would have been quite successful. He could have been a very good lawyer. I'm absolutely sure about that. It's just that he tried and didn't like it and went the way of poetry instead.
So why do you say he'd be good as a lawyer then?
Oh, he's
I
highly
guess that's
persuasive.
partly why he makes a
Yeah.
good character in your novel.
Oh, yes. He would. For one thing, he's rich, kind of upper middle class. He gets a fantastic education, and the education of a young Roman, a rich young Roman in those days, is rhetoric, how to present your argument so that you win. So we know, for example, he was doing his kind of gap year abroad, studying in places like Athens when his brother died, and Ovid was called back home to kind of take up the mantle of being the serious oldest child who would carry on the family reputation. And that's when he began his very short-lived career in politics. But when you look at his poetry, again, like I said, his ability to cover up feelings, the truth himself, or to present something in two ways, almost one after the other. An example of that in the love poems, the Amores, he has this mythical girlfriend, Corinna. And in one poem, Corinna has had an abortion. Ovid finds out about it. He's absolutely horrified. Next poem, still on the abortion, Ovid is very much, oh, Corinna, why did you do it? Why didn't you come and tell me? Why did you not let me help you? So two completely different ways of reacting to an event in poems that he published. So we know that the order is the order he chose it. He puts those two poems next to each other. And that's, I think, a very good example of how he uses poetry to explore different facets of people, events, whatever. And that, I think, is because from his youth, he will have been trained. His teacher will have said, right, we're going to have a disputation. We're going to have a debate. You will argue this side. Your mate will argue the other side. And then tomorrow we'll swap. So he's used to that. And that comes through in the poetry, I think.
Yeah, interesting.
I
So
answered your question. I can't
no,
remember.
you did absolutely. No, I'm just it's a stunned silence. But Ovid is a contemporary of two other very well-known poets, Virgil, of course, and then also Horace. But Ovid is the one that really captured you. I mean, you studied classics for,
Mhm.
well, as an undergrad. Did you do a postgraduate?
No, I did my postgraduate was the teacher training.
Right. Yes, I should mention you're a teacher. But I wondered what it was about Ovid that captured you ahead of, Virgil and Horace, he's very funny, Horace, isn't he?
Horace, yes, I think Horace is a fun person. I have a feeling if I wanted to go to a dinner party and you said to me you could have Ovid, Horace, or Virgil sitting next to you, I would go for Horace, because you'd have a great conversation without having to, slap his hands away all the time. Virgil, I think it would have been very, very serious, and wouldn't have a problem with hands with Virgil, I'm sure. But I'm absolutely convinced that Ovid tried with everything that, had a pulse and was near him. But yes, Horace, I think, also comes from an extremely humble background, son of a freedman, knows what it's like to have to scrape along for money. And I have a feeling that would give him a dimension that makes him a very interesting person. What I liked about Ovid, there is a joy in life that I find is in his poetry, that how you get feelings with poetry. I feel that is real. I feel he really, really enjoyed life. And he has this amazing ability to make a line of Latin just dazzle and shine and be happy, even sometimes when he's describing sad things. I think he's got this exuberance that I really, really like. And he has a very interesting life. I mean, I've always wanted to explore that, the meeting he must have had with Augustus in 8 AD, where Augustus says, right, you are in trouble. And everyone wants to know what that is all about. So I think for someone who enjoys writing mysteries, that was almost irresistible. And I know lots of other people have explored it. I've read an article by a very serious academic who's counted up that in the last 20 years before he wrote the article, there was something like 15 different theories as to what Ovid had done wrong. So you make up your own and you go with it.
Excellent. Well, yes, we're definitely going to get that. So listeners, I'm going to keep them on the edge until the end so we know what happened to Ovid, or what we think happened to Ovid. Now, you've mentioned his beautiful Latin. I can see behind you, you've got these beautiful, and they very much are, the Loeb Classical Library.
Yeah.
With pink, reddish pink
yeah,
covers.
Red for Rome, green for
yes,
Greece.
green are far superior, of course, but we won't get into that now. But I wondered how much you were referring back to those whilst you were writing the novel. I mean, obviously, this is a pacey novel all about a mystery. But did you sort of sprinkle in pieces of poetry throughout?
Yes, his poems written from exile, the Tristia, gave me a timeline. So I made sure that I'd read all of those, and then I also needed, because religious festivals were also, they kind of pinned the action down. So I had to read his poem about that, which is very, very serious, very complex, frankly boring poem about Roman ritual and festivities. It's I mean, Ovid doesn't often get boring, but I have a theory as to why the Fasti was written, but it's very, very useful because it gives us tons of information about Roman religious festivals from January to June. He never finished it, unfortunately. So I've got to explain that at some point in probably book 3 of the series.
Splendid. So, okay, so when we were talking about Ovid and growing up, I think we were saying he'd sort of reached Battle of Actium 31 BC, then you get a bit of a period of stability. What was Ovid doing in his late teens, early 20s?
Well, being educated up until the age of about 20, then coming back to Rome and taking up a couple of very minor, boring jobs that you give the young men to do to learn how to organize things. And we know that one was in a law court as a kind of panel of judges, but one was on one of the commissions of 3. Now, there were 2 of them. One was to do with minting money, but the other was the Commission for Prisons and Executions. And as I was reading about them, somebody a scholar whose name I've forgotten, suggested that it might well be that there was an element of proto town watch about it. Like, you know, where Augustus set up the vigiles, the watch in Rome. And this guy suggested that maybe the Commission for Prisoner of Executions were responsible for security on the streets of Rome to some extent. So I took that and ran with it. And I had a very young Ovid in charge of one of the squads of the Commission for Prisons and Executions, going out on night patrol. Frankly, I think that I probably stretched that way too far, but never mind, I'm writing fiction. And there he meets the young Ovidius, who is going to be very important to him later on in the book. That's what you do when you're a historical novelist. You find one little grain of truth and you think, oh, how far can I make that go? But it was very useful for giving Ovid an almost detective-y background in his youth.
And so when did he start publishing his poetry then?
Well, we think that in the late 20s, he was almost certainly in a kind of literary salon run by Corvinus Messala. He would have been in the same literary salon as the poetess Sulpicia. And Ovid may well have met some very influential people there. We think he's publishing the Amores in the teens BC, so round about the time of his first marriage and possibly his second marriage. He then moves on from the Amores. We know he revised them because they were published in 5 books and then 3. And he then moves on to poems like the Heroides, which are letters from abandoned mythical women having a go at the men who have abandoned them. So, you know, Ariadne having a go at Theseus, things like that. And then he writes the crucially important Ars Amatoria, the art of making love, which is so much fun. I would recommend it to anyone. It's not very rude. It's just spicy and it enjoys being a bit naughty. There's a lovely enjoyment about just writing it that you can read as you go along. Then he goes on to the Metamorphoses, which is probably the work that the Western world most knows about him. Really took the medieval and Renaissance times loved the Metamorphoses. And then he went
just
to
diving in there, Fiona.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. That's the work that I'm probably most familiar with, having read it as an undergraduate. Why was it so popular during that medieval period? And for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with Metamorphoses, why do you think it's probably still his most enduring work? Would you say? Why
Yes.
is that, do you think?
Well, what is the first Greek myth that you can remember reading? Do you know?
Yes, I think I would have been 9 years old, and I had these wonderful Greek. I think they were originated in Greece, but they were translated into English, and they had the pictures of the Odyssey and the Iliad, and then also there was a third book which was sort of all the best of the other myths as well.
Yeah.
But I think it was probably the Odyssey or the Iliad.
Yeah. But the third one along, once we've got Homer out of the way, which you always have to do with classics.
Yes.
The third one along, my guess, had Daedalus and Icarus in it.
Ah, yes, of course. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, indeed.
Now, that's just an example. Most retellings of Greek myths, apart from the Iliad and the Odyssey, will probably have been based on the Metamorphoses, because what Ovid does is go from the creation of the world to his own day, and he tells stories. And the thing that links every single story is that in every story, sometimes the main point of the story, sometimes very much oh, by the way, at the end, is this idea of change. Somebody or something changes into something else. So, for example, Narcissus looks into a pond, is so transfixed with his own beauty, he cannot move, and he is changed into the flower, Narcissus. And when Phaethon steals the sun's chariots, his sisters all turn into trees for some reason. Apollo chases the nymph Daphne. There's an awful lot of ravishing in the Metamorphoses. And Daphne turns into a laurel bush. So this idea of change is a useful device that enables Ovid to spend 15 books dazzling us with these stories that take us all the way through to Augustus. Augustus gets mentioned right at the end.
So these myths that he's writing about, he would have had access to the knowledge of Greek myths that have simply been lost today, and so he's our only source?
I'm sure that if you scoured around in the Greek sources, you would find most of them there. But Ovid is the one that, like I say, the medieval and Renaissance scholars went for because he told them so well. And there is something about Greek myths that I just think is perennially appealing to everyone. And that's why, I mean, I can remember them in my reading scheme at school. Through the Rainbow, Book 2, Orange, Theseus and the Minotaur, that sort of thing. So because he puts them all together in this glorious tapestry, I think that's very attractive, and people picked up on it.
Is there I'll put a link in for those curious to learn more, as well as your book, of course. Is there a translation that you recommend?
Yes, Stephanie, she published it, I think, last year.
Oh, right, a new translation.
Oh, yes, it's absolutely lovely.
Well, I'm very interested in, and I wanted to talk about this to you actually, regarding translations by female scholars, because I think it's probably fair to say, up until quite recently, most translations were done, certainly in English, by men.
Yes. When I was at university, it was like, were you a Richmond Lattimore or a Robert Fagles fan? That sort of thing.
Oh, Fagles, he's a big name, isn't he?
Yes, his has lasted very well, I think. I like Lattimore, I must admit, for the Iliad.
Interesting. Okay. So, because I had Robin Lane Fox on to talk about Homer and the Iliad, who
Yeah.
you must be, because you moved in the same circles back in the day.
He was a very grand lecturer, but I did meet him at Oxford once. Yeah, it was pre the Alexander film, and I think he must have been in negotiation with Oliver Stone about that at the time. But yes, he was very jolly. We were both in the Garden Society for some reason. Oh, he was a gardening columnist for the Financial Times, and I'd got roped into helping to organise the Garden Society. So I can remember meeting him at the Garden Society Christmas dinner.
Oh, wonderful.
Happy days. But yeah, I was very much in awe.
Well, this is not, I didn't intend to go down this route because this is very much interested more in, okay, so I think the translation you've mentioned is by Stephanie McCarter.
McCarter, yes.
And so then we've also had a translation about 5 or 6 years ago by Emily Wilson of the Odyssey, and then more recently the Iliad. And I'm really interested in this because I read the Emily Wilson translation, the Odyssey, gave a whole new perspective on some of the tales, and it was very compelling to me. And I'm not saying this because this isn't some kind of trendy going down the route of a feminist reinterpretation, I don't think, and therefore a little bit more political. I think it gives a bit more of a different perspective, in that we've been so used to listening to men, hearing from men, reading men who've made the translation, that's almost become the standard. Whereas this perspective that Emily Wilson gives, and I assume Stephanie McCarter gives in the Metamorphoses, really adds a lot of explanation to stories that maybe we've assumed were only to be told in a certain way.
Yes, and I mean, I believe that every generation should retranslate the Iliad and the Odyssey anyway. But what I enjoyed was reading for both Emily Wilson and Stephanie McCarter, reading them discussing how they translated a certain word, a certain passage, a certain way. And the one that comes to mind when I read the opening of Emily Wilson's Odyssey, in the first line, she calls Odysseus a complicated man. And the word complicated just hooked me, because normally people say, I think it's something like polutletos or something, and they say long suffering, enduring. And she said complicated, and I loved that. And I do like every now and then to just burrow down to the level of each word. Why did you translate that word as? And they explained them. And you don't have to agree with everyone, but I did find myself just chiming with their explanations. So, and the thing about Stephanie McCarter's translation, it's incredibly readable. And it also sounds good when read out loud, which of course is probably how most people first encountered it in Ovid's own day. They would have listened to someone declaiming it.
Fantastic. Well, certainly have a link in there. Well, let's talk a little bit about Ovid then. Okay, so he writes Metamorphoses in the same year he's exiled, isn't that right?
Metamorphoses, I think, must have been in the years leading up to it. We don't have exact years for many of these works, but it would have been after the Ars Amatoria. I think it would have been about that sort of crossing the join of BC and AD. Yeah, but the funny thing is that Ars Amatoria and Metamorphoses are behind him. He's now on a new work, and it's a much more serious work. And it's only then that he gets into trouble. So that's a little bit strange, I think.
Okay, so we don't really know. There are many theories, as you've said. Some scholars have come up with around 15 or something. But what do you think he did, or what do you think were the reasons for his exile?
Well, he says here the biggest clue he gives us is the phrase "Carmen et error." It was my song and my mistake. And the Carmen has to be the Ars Amatoria, because it didn't really go with the sort of wholesome Roman family values that Augustus was promoting. The Ars Amatoria basically tells you how to pick up your partner of choice. And I don't think Augustus would go to the Circus Maximus very comfortable with the idea that everyone there would have read Ovid's advice on how you choose a pretty girl, sit next to her. It's appalling, really. It basically make her feel very uncomfortable by pressing up against her and things like that. So Augustus wouldn't have liked that, but that was years in the past. So why now do you have a go at Ovid about that? It must have been something else as well. Now in AD 8, again, timings are very, very nebulous. But at round about that time, Augustus exiled 2 of his grandchildren. Posthumus was sent off to the island of Planasia, and Posthumus is his last male direct blood relation. But his granddaughter Julia is also exiled. She's sent off to the island of Chimerus. And we don't know why. Everyone assumes it's some sort of sexual crime, because her mother, also called Julia, of course, was definitely exiled for having lots of affairs and being very naughty. You know, the scene in I, Claudius, where Brian Blessed goes along that line of senators saying, which of you has not slept with my daughter? So Julia the elder, very clear. Julia the younger, frankly, not really got much of an idea. We know that she was pregnant. It is likely that she has been divorced from her husband for some time, so the baby may well not be his. We know that a man was also exiled for being her lover, a guy called Silanus. But that wasn't a formal exile. Silanus was just told to go and live in Athens, which he did. And Julia is sent off and lives in isolation, has her baby. Augustus orders that the baby is exposed at birth. So Julia is definitely being punished more than her so-called lover. With that happening at the same time, in the same year, one wonders if Ovid was at all involved with Julia's set, saw something that he didn't report to the emperor, maybe. Some people have speculated that Julia and Posthumus may have been trying to organize some sort of political opposition to Augustus. In 8 AD, Augustus is rising. No, he is 70. He must have been very, very aware that he had to make plans for what would happen when he died. There is no doubt that his preference would have been a blood male relative, but one by one they die. And then Posthumus clearly does something so awful that Augustus cannot possibly have him as an heir. So Posthumus is sent off to Planasia. Poor old Augustus is left with his wife's elder son Tiberius, who he allegedly doesn't really like very much. But that is what happens in 8 AD. Basically, there is some sort of a crisis, and therefore we link Ovid to it. You know, he got exiled in the same year, therefore he must have been involved.
Well, he wouldn't have been exiled if he had no connection with the imperial family and, I don't know, had behaved badly in a brothel or something.
No. People who get exiled for being very naughty, and usually with an imperial woman. I don't think that a 50-year-old Ovid would have been involved with a young and beautiful imperial princess. But he might have been on the outskirts of their sort of set. So, they might have used him as their pet poet, or, oh, let's invite Ovid over to dinner, darling, he's so funny. And he could have seen something. And he could, if he was really stupid, he could have been involved in some sort of conspiracy. It's very hard to imagine, because he's not a stupid man. And he does quite like his own skin, so I can't see him risking himself.
Yeah, it's this enduring mystery. It is fascinating. But he's dispatched or exiled to the Black Sea. And
Yeah.
listeners may be familiar with the wonderful Turner painting, which I'll put a link in for. But what's life like for him in the Black Sea? Because I've always imagined it was quite a nice sort of extended holiday.
Well, if you look at the place where he was sent now, Constanza, I mean, today, the temperature in Constanza, I keep an eye on it, so I just get the weather right, because in Constanza, and it's like in the 20s, and it's really nice. And
It's in Romania, isn't it?
yeah, 25 degrees. May have a thunderstorm later because it's so hot, but they've had a gorgeous hot summer. It does get quite cold in the winter. Ovid complains that the sea freezes over. People have raised queries about that, because at the time it was what's called by geographers the Roman warm period. And although it's very difficult to tell exactly, there's cautious speculation that the weather probably was a bit like it is today. In which case, the sea icing up, possibly. The Danube freezing over so that horrible hairy tribesmen from the north ride over and attack, and Ovid has to take his place on the walls of Tomis, guarding it from Scythian arrows. And you do feel there's a bit of exaggeration going on there, so that everyone in Rome feels sorry for him.
Well, they don't, because he doesn't return. It was actually quite sad, isn't it?
I tell you what, I find absolutely fascinating when you look at the actual history. Do you remember I said Julia the Younger had a lover who was sent off to Athens? When Tiberius became emperor, that man, Silanus, was allowed back to Rome, but Ovid wasn't. And I do wonder why. And that makes me wonder, I mean, as a historian, it does make me think maybe Ovid didn't have anything to do with Julia, because he could not have committed a greater crime than Silanus. So what did he do that was so bad that he had to be kept in Tomis? Writing these increasingly wailing I'm going to die here. Please, I've written my epitaph. Will you make sure it's on my tombstone? That sort of thing. I'm sure that everyone in Rome got absolutely fed to the back teeth of reading them. It does go on a bit. He
I
said
guess,
sympathetically.
yes, well, we can sympathize, I suppose.
Yes.
But was his reputation then, after his death, it just sort of blew up in Rome, or was it a sort of slow burner? And really, it's only the medieval period that we have to thank for his.
Oh, at the time of his exile, he was the most famous living poet in Rome. And I don't think that ever changed. I think he's been on school syllabuses since he died. I'm sure about that, because of the Metamorphoses being a great way of teaching Greek myths. So I think he has always been very popular. He reached his peak in Renaissance times. I mean, Shakespeare uses Ovid. He clearly read at least a translation of Ovid, but he would have read Ovid in Latin at his Stratford Grammar School. I'm certain about that. So I don't think he's ever gone out of fashion. I don't think someone like Ovid does, because he writes these wonderful myths and sex. So, what's not to love, really?
Well, yeah, and
Apart from if you look at his attitude towards women, but set in the context of ancient Rome, I think he's fairly normal, alas.
yes, of his time, yes. Well, I guess the evidence is with this recent translation, and then of course your novels. It just goes to show we'll be writing about Ovid forever,
Yes,
hopefully.
I'm certain that, like I say, every generation someone is going to come along and retranslate him, and someone like me will come along and think, I've got a perspective on this that I think I could write about.
Oh, well, this has been absolutely fantastic, Fiona. Thank you so much. Love talking about Ovid.
So do I. Can you tell? Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Particularly with for listeners who can't quite see, there's a wonderful Roman legionnaires helmet behind as well. So
That's Marcus.
right, and it's fantastic. So basically, I'm looking at ancient Rome behind Fiona. But thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ollie, very much.
Thanks so much for listening. Links are in the show notes. Plenty more history on the way, but until then, thank you and good night.